Well, of course, it's the first time in about 600 years that this has happened. No one was expecting it. It might be worth saying why the Pope resigning is an odd idea for some Catholics, and why it's not happened before. Okay, if the Pope has to be the embodied symbol of unity for the whole Church and a singular focus of authority, there's a real problem if potentially you've got more than one Pope. If a Pope resigns and he goes to, as the current Pope is going to do, he goes to live in an enclosed religious community within the Vatican, and some people think that he's still the Pope and they don't like the guy who takes over, potentially loyalties are split and there might be an argument about who really is the Pope here. So this is why through history the Church has always been very reluctant to have a retired Pope, just in case this splits loyalties and causes a division in the Church, because that's exactly what the papacy is designed to avoid.
If the chief executive of McDonald's
Right.
resigns, people
Yeah.
just do what the new chief executive says.
Okay, right. Well, here's the difference, okay? I'll try my best to explain this. There's a difference between what someone is and the job that they do. I am a father, okay? It's not a job that I do, and nothing could change that. I am and always will be a father. It's a change in my nature, if you like. Now, the job that I do is I'm a university lecturer. Now, I could change my job and go and work in McDonald's tomorrow. And that would be a change of job, a change of role. Now, the point is the Pope a bit like being a father, or is it a bit like being a lecturer in a university? Is it just a job? Now, some people would say that the Pope is being like a father. It's a change in nature, what you are, and you can't step out of it. It could never change. In fact, that's a misunderstanding. The Pope is a role, okay? It's not a nature. It is more like an office within the Church, a post within the Church, that you can leave in the same way that I could leave the University of Nottingham and go and work somewhere else. Within the Church, there are these, what we call orders. Now, the orders are the order of a bishop, the order of priest, and the order of deacon. Those are not jobs. Those are a bit more like being a father. It becomes your nature. So I'm a priest, I'm a Church of England priest, and I could never stop being a priest, because becoming a priest is not just taking on a job, it's a change in my nature, a bit like becoming a dad.
If you had a dramatic change of heart tomorrow and started cavorting with prostitutes and taking drugs and never went to church and no longer believed in God, I wouldn't consider you a priest.
I'm afraid I still would be, and the Church has been clear about that for many hundreds of years, simply because there's nothing about my behaviour and my character that would make me good enough to be a priest. Okay? So my ministry as a priest, particularly when I'm sort of presiding at the Eucharist, taking communion or baptising someone else, does not depend on how good I am as a person. Okay? It's objective. And this was decided way back in the late 4th, early 5th century, that no one could be good enough to perform that role, and therefore it's not dependent on how good we are as people, but simply on the fact that the order has been bestowed upon us by the Church, by the community. To bring this back to the Pope, the point about the Pope is that the Pope is a bishop. That's his nature. He's the Bishop of Rome. That's his nature, if you like. That will never change for Joseph Ratzinger. He will always be a bishop. But he's taken on the role of Pope as Bishop of Rome, and that can change. He can step out of that, because it is a role, it's not an order. And the order is what changes your nature. It's bishop, priest or deacon. The role can shift.
So God didn't decide who would be Pope?
Well, the Pope is elected by the cardinals, and the election of the next Pope will happen very rapidly. And the idea is that after due consideration, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, they will follow God's will and choose the person who God has called to this office. That's how they will put it, but that decision is mediated through the cardinals of the Church.
Obviously, it's not unanimous. We know this because we see the black smoke and the black smoke, and eventually we see the white smoke. Does that mean 120 cardinals heard correctly from God and 80 didn't? Or God told 80 of them a different person?
No.
Why don't they all walk in and vote for the same person?
Okay, I think the way that we would put it is that discerning the will of God for sinful human beings, in other words, discerning the good, what is right, is never an easy thing. You know, for any of us, trying to decide what is right in our daily lives is always tricky, and we often do it in discussion with other people. And hopefully, by collectively debating these things, we arrive at what is, in the end, the right and proper decision.
So, I mean, this is the Pope.
Yep.
Sure, this is really important.
Yeah.
Surely this would be one of the few cases where God would say, look, I'm putting my foot down here. I'm going to send down a dove to land on the head of the man I want. Why does he make the Pope difficult?
Because, well, the election of the Pope is usually, I mean, compared to, for example, the election of the President of the United States of America, the election of the Pope is incredibly straightforward and very, very quick. I think the point is that God doesn't act sort of despite human beings or circumvent them, but through them.
You're not Catholic, but you do make a good case for the Pope.
Yeah.
So let me ask you about the case for conclave. The conclave, the way that they elect the Pope, is very interesting. It makes for great movies and books. It's full of mystery, and I love the sound of it.
Yeah.
Is it a good way to appoint God's man on earth?
Well, I mean, the difficulty is that you're appointing someone to an office that has enormous significance and therefore power for about a third of the world's population. And the competing interest groups and desires and so on are just, I mean, they're far greater and more complex than would happen with any democratic election within a single country, where at least there's a uniformity of culture and language, whereas the church extends right throughout the world. And therefore it needs to happen with a degree of order. And I think that the church would say that makes complete transparency very difficult. So cameras aren't allowed into the conclave, and they're not continually briefing the press outside about who's voting for who, and all these sorts of things. The modern world would regard this as secretive and all the rest of it. But I think the point is that unless it happens in this way, it becomes a much more complex and much more chaotic process. It would take much, much longer, and it would potentially be extremely divisive. And that the whole point of this process is to stop division. It's to stop the disunity of the church, the split of the church. So I think they would say that this is simply just the way that it has to be given the aims of the papacy. I mean, of course, one could say other things about the conclave, that it's a lot of men dressed up in black and red dresses, and it's hardly representative. I mean, one should remember that the cardinals do come from every corner of the earth, so in that sense there's a degree of representation. The debate about the place of women in episcopal and priestly ministry, of course, that's a different matter, and that the Anglican Communion has taken a very different track on that issue. Usually, yeah.
He's the head of the church. No, he's the head of the Western Church. There's also all the Eastern churches, the African churches. He is the head of the Christians who are based in Europe. But it was realized in the Middle Ages that say I don't like the front runner and I'm backing number 2. I can just keep the election going and try to wear people down.